Welcome, everybody. My name is Tanya Lachlan. I'm a director of product marketing of unstructured data solutions and AI at Hitachi Vantara. I am super excited today to host an interactive discussion with some thought leaders and experts in data protection. Here with me, industry thought leader Howard Holton, also CTO and analyst at GigaOM, and I'll have you give a little bit more about your background in just a minute. We also have Dr. Thomas Eifert, the CTO of IT Center at RWTH Aachen University. So Howard, why don't you get us started? Tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background. You have pretty extensive experience in data storage, data protection. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So like you said, I'm Howard Holton. I'm the CTO here at GigaOM. GigaOM's an analyst firm. I've been here 2 years. Before that, I was the CIO and CISO for a global industrial manufacturing company. I was CTO of Hitachi Vantara before that, and it was the unstructured data product that I was most interested in that brought me there. Before that, I was the CIO and CISO for a legal services firm. I've been an engineer at WellPoint, Verizon, CIO for an automotive company. I go back 35 years in IT. I wrote and sold my first piece of software called Plead Perfect back in 1987, and never left IT. So I've been an engineer, an architect, a consultant, CIO, CTO, CISO, kind of done all of the things. And I spend most of my time now on strategy and strategic planning for large organizations.
Is that it?
That's it. That's it.
All right. Thomas, if you could give us a little bit of background. I know RWTH may not be kind of a household name in all geos, but I took a look and I looked it up on Times Higher Education 2024, ranked 90th place in world university. So that's pretty big kudos. And if you could give a little bit more background on, RWTH, kind of, what it means in terms of, I guess, economics, right, within your local government. It's a little bit different, public versus private. So you could talk a little bit more about that. That'd be great.
Yes, thank you. So at Aachen, RWTH Aachen University, which is one of the largest engineering and natural science-oriented universities in Germany, we currently have about 45,000 students and an annual budget of about €1 billion with public funding as well as project funding from either funding agencies or from companies. And as said, we have a very strong focus on engineering science, and with that, we also act as one of 10 providers to German universities as a national high-performance computing site, and we are also active in the National Initiative for Research Data Management. So this is a setting of the university at all, and the IT Center is the largest university central IT in Germany. We are one of the few that are so-called full service providers. So from the wires in the ground to own research and teaching, we have the whole program of IT in our house. And at this institution, since more than 10 years, I have the role of the CTO, so being responsible for the technological oriented strategy. In my former life, I've been physicist and solid state chemist.
Well, I'm in good company here. We'll talk a little bit more about your project in a minute and, the massive set of universities that you've brought together, right? But what I thought would be a good idea to start with is a little bit more about data protection, right? The evolution and the changes that have really happened in the last decades. I mean, data protection is not something new. It's been around for a very long time. But, in terms of what people talked about, okay, backup or tape or RTO, RPO, the conversations are really changing in nature, right? There's a lot of changing in terms of data value becoming more important, cyber and different risks popping up. So wondering, Howard, if you could talk a little bit about how you see the landscape has changed over the decades.
Sure. So when I got started, backup was a replication of data more than anything else, right? It wasn't until probably the mid to late 90s that I think backup really became something that we talked about, which was still just a copy on tape. The backup vendors were relatively new, right? Veritas was a leading name in the space, which is not a name that we're hearing nearly as frequently now. And we were still focused on kind of application state from hardware failure. And that's where backup and recovery really comes from, or accidental deletion, not malice, by an employee, right? Someone overwrote a bunch of records. A developer did an insert and overwrote some records. An update damaged the application state. While those are all still valid today, that traditional backup methodology does not provide successful, comprehensive, and complete recovery from a cyber incident, which is a much more common recovery incident than it ever has been before, right? And so today what we're really looking at is cyber resiliency and cyber recovery, not application resilience and application recovery alone, which is where we've been in the past. And that requires a fundamental change in how you think about and how you execute your backup and recovery plans. And things like RPO and RTO take on a whole different connotation, when what I want to do is I need to be able to recover safely and securely and thoroughly from a cyber event. I can do safely and I can do securely, maybe, but I can't do thoroughly, because until I'm able to execute an investigation, until I know how they got in, until I know all of the things they left behind, it's very hard to ensure that. And that's why we're looking at new cyber recovery methodologies that provide us a known, good, clean state that breaks the prior relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And, speed comes into play too. I mean, years ago it was RTO, RPO, right? You had the ability to, have some certain level of downtime. There was different numbers people would throw out over the years of, okay, we can tolerate this, we can tolerate that. Now it's literally zero downtime. I mean, data is the lifeblood of organizations. And so any downtime is usually a significant cost of revenue to the businesses. And, I was also thinking the changes from the yesteryear were really about reactive. Something happens and then you need to go and, restore it, or, whatever you need to do. But now organizations, especially with AI and some of the other capabilities you can build in, becoming more proactive to protect against it before it happens. So with that, Thomas, are you seeing any different trends or any other points that you wanted to talk about in terms of the changing evolution of data protection?
No, I might add a bit. So everything Howard said is true for our university as well. And in addition, a while ago, we had computers for writing down your articles or publication, for collaboration and so on. But there were reasonable amounts of daily life that do not rely on having IT. So teaching, you just enter your lecture room and tell students what you want to teach, or experiments run autonomously, and then you get the data from there. And this has all changed. So either media during lecture or running an experiment relies on the availability of IT. So everything about RPO and RTO is the same as the university. You can't reasonably work here without having IT available. Yeah,
online all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Poor kids these days have to grow up that way. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Thomas, RWTH. Tell me about the project and the challenges. I understand that the government wanted to really centralize and improve data protection across all universities, right? And they look to you and RWTH to bring that together. Can you talk a little bit about the starting point, what the solution or scenario looked like before that you had to kind of go in and tackle, and then, what you're trying to solve for?
There were several starting points that occurred simultaneously. So on the one hand, we had the universities, all of them, with in part decades-old systems, different at each side, that tried to run a suitable data protection at every university. There was the rise of cyberattacks that many or several universities in Europe, not only Germany, fell victim to, and the ministry or the government of our state that tried to find a way to protect its own universities against this cyber attacks, data loss, or ransom attacks. And as I said, all of these occurred simultaneously. So when we brought up the idea to cooperate in a new manner, not only to share licenses, but really to operate together, it fitted the plans of the government to improve data protection, data resiliency for all universities. So these two formed the perfect match, and that was where the project started.
And I'd have to imagine that productivity was an important aspect. I mean, I think it was 30-something different universities, right? So I'm sure they all had different gear and software, and streamlining that, right, and making sure they're consistent service levels. Sounds like that was a big part of it as well.
Definitely. So North Rhine-Westphalia is by population the biggest federal state in Germany, and we have more than 30 universities of various types here. Some of our size, well, none of our size, but others have, for instance, an IT department of 2 people. So this is the whole span, and this consolidation addressed the whole range from the large universities with as many students as we have, to those with some guys trying to run a modern IT as good as they could. And yes, as you imagine, we had all available tools, all available platforms, and tried to consolidate that. Where the technical part was one thing, and the processes, the organizational part, was the even harder part.
Yeah. Usually is.
So I'm seeing a lot of that kind of federated, centralized, distributed model shuffling as companies start to find their way back to something that's more either federated or truly centralized. It's a complex problem, but it's nice to see that you guys have gone through it and kind of found your way through it.
And you have to understand the organizational thing, since all the universities are legally independent from each other. So there's no common government besides of the funding government. So all of them had to be convinced to join this project and sort of get rid of their own solution and rely on that centralized solution. Because
it's basically data protection as a service you're offering as a service to all these groups, these universities.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's more, it has very important cooperative tasks, since we centralize the data protection. We do not necessarily centralize the expertise on data protection use cases. So for instance, the specialist how to back up an Oracle database is not necessarily the one that's capable of running a multi-petabyte infrastructure.
Right.
So the support, the mutual support across the universities is far wider than the infrastructure itself.
Yeah. So, Howard, Do you see a lot of other organizations, given what we talked about, the landscape and evolution of data protection changing, do you see a lot of other organizations kind of jumping in and overhauling their data protection strategy for, something more centralized, consolidated, streamlined, or are you seeing, more of, gradual trying to fix little bits?
I see both, right? I probably don't see as many organizations doing the first as I would like to see. When we kind of look at kind of how priorities are brought to the table, cyber resilience, backup and protection are probably not getting the space at the table that I think they need to get for the value that they provide. I would say Thomas's viewpoint, Thomas's execution has a lot of really smart things, but there's a kernel of brilliance I want to kind of highlight there, which is they approach it as we're kind of the expertise resides where the expertise needs to reside, right? We're really good at running the platform. You're really good at running the application. Let's come together, right, to determine how best to protect it. You bring the knowledge that you have that we're not going to try to replicate. We'll bring the knowledge that we have that you shouldn't try to replicate. And we'll come together with a solution that works for you, right? And so you kind of get this federated model that allows for the tribal knowledge within the application teams to be brought to the table, and they don't have to kind of fit to what the backup team has decided. And I think that's where a lot of these projects go wrong, right? I think a lot of these projects try to force one side or the other rather than bring them together as collaborators. And that would be a thing that I would encourage organizations, especially those that are struggling getting these projects done, is these are business outcomes. These are not technology outcomes. And so make sure that you're including the business people, make sure that you're including the deployed technical teams, make sure that you're opening the space for that tribal knowledge to really be leveraged. Would you agree, Thomas?
Yeah, and perhaps this is a point where this construction of these many universities really has a strength, since on the scientific level, of course, universities compete with each other, but on this infrastructure level, there are many of the same kind where we can form an alliance to cooperate with.
Yeah, no, that's great insights there. You both have talked a lot about data risks and threats. Obviously, cyber, ransomware. If I could ask you, Thomas, is there a particular nightmare scenario or one thing you worry about in terms of data protection? And your experience dealing with maybe a ransomware attack, if that's happened.
So the most nightmarish might not be an attack, but as a university, as a publicly funded university, we are an open organization by design. So we cannot lock up our systems, our organization, as might be possible with a commercial business. So we have many personal and technical and organizational ties to the outside, other universities, companies, people. So this openness, of course, contradicts the idea of a tightly controlled IT infrastructure. A bit of nightmarish, definitely. A particular nightmarish attack? No, probably not. Of course, there are systems of different sensitivity to the overall business of our university, but there are also differentiated measures of protecting them. So from technical aspects, everything how it mentioned might happen, will happen, has happened at some times, and until now we've been able to recover from all of them.
Great. Yeah. No, I mean, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? And Howard, you and I were talking the other day, and these cyber organizations or ransomware hackers build a business around this. This is no messing around. This isn't just a college student just messed around with some code and happened to get in, right? This is serious business with serious money. And so it's not if, it's when. And, how many layers can you put of protection? It's not just, at the infrastructure. Yeah, of course you want it to be, immutable. You want encryption, but how do you protect it? I think of, different walls in a castle. You got to have more walls to prevent people from getting in. And the more, if there's the moat with the dragon, right, and the drawbridge, I'm probably going to pass that castle up and go to the one with the gates wide open that don't have dragons, right?
Well,
So, yeah,
that's
go
a
ahead.
really interesting analogy, because if you stand outside some of our the oldest cities in the world, like I'll use Jerusalem as an example, you see the walls evolve as technology evolved as well, right? When it was just humans, before we domesticated horses, the walls were really low. Then you had spears, then you had horses, then you had firearms, then you had bows, then you had, all of these things, right? Until you get to artillery, and then you get to the point where walls don't work anymore, and you have to defend in a very different way. And that's not a bad way to think about security, right? Our security needs to evolve. Our walls need to evolve as the technology of the opponents evolves, right? I think of it more like Swiss cheese. Any individual layer of Swiss cheese has a lot of holes in it. But if you ever look at a block of Swiss cheese, none of those holes penetrate all the way through, right? And this is a layer. And I think too many people look at backup and recovery as the rightly final layer, but also the ultimate kind of layer of protection, when in fact it's the most costly layer of protection, right? Recovering from a cyber event using backup is a very costly process versus preventing to begin with.
No.
Right? And we kind of need to always consider that we want this to be our final layer. We want this to be our most resilient layer. We also want this to be the big red nuclear button that we don't have to touch.
So in essence, we never want to use our backup system for recovery, but we have it just in case we do need it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's a different world, and it as soon as you're not ever fully secure and protected, because the day you catch up to, the latest Trojan horse or whatever it is, a new one's invented. So
They invent a better horse. Yeah.
right.
Right.
So it's an evolving thing, and you have to constantly invest in it, and add more layers of Swiss cheese to Howard's analogy, which is making me hungry. So this all kind of leads me to think about the value of data, right? And I also think the changes in data protection, in the evolution and all these different things is also kind of happened in parallel with the value of data increasing, right? I mean, data in the past, you used it, you were done with it. It wasn't so much about analytics and can we understand our customer buyer patterns and their sentiment and cross-reference that with their support info and know that they're, maybe interested in buying something, and then boom, you put an ad on their device. I mean, there's just so much analytics and targeting, and obviously from a scientific standpoint, Thomas, and what we can do and uncover and new insights and innovations and cures, right? It's just crazy. So Howard, if you could talk a little bit about the value of data and how you think people tie, dollars to it, right? Is there some approach, or, how can people kind of think about that? Because to your point, you have to spend the money on data protection. It's more expensive to have to restore afterwards. So
For sure.
everyone always wants well, what's the model? What's the ROI if I spend all this money? But if we can make data the central point, well, data is your lifeblood of your organization. So what does that mean to you?
So I know everyone's tired of it, but I like to say I like data is the new oil. And I don't mean data is the new oil because it creates riches from the ground. When I say data is the new oil, oil was originally used to replace whale oil in lamps. And it became heating oil, and it started to power our cars. Today, petroleum from the ground, is used in 4,000 different commercial applications. Right? That's the potential of data. The potential of data isn't this is the first order use that we see today or the second order use we see today. It's the 4,000th use that we don't see today, that we are blissfully unaware of because we've not made those connections. Right? And that's really, when we're in the business of data, that's really what we need to be thinking about. not how do I know what to do with that piece of data today or those pieces of data today, but really how do I enable the volume, velocity, and variety of data to be stored, captured, and protected for the value that I'm going to generate with it tomorrow, right? And so that really is the job. The job is not only the first and second order uses of data that we're doing today, but to make sure that the data is protected and available in a way that we can use it tomorrow. And so more than just the data, we need to protect the data, but we also need to protect the context by which that data is created, the context by which we get that data. We then need to layer governance over top of it, right? In order to do that, if we don't have a scalable backup and recovery plan that covers us from those events that we're aware of, and likely events we're not quite aware of today, we're starting on a foundation that is already fractured, starting on a foundation that's already going to have to be rebuilt, right? So when we're looking at these things, we really need to be cautious not to look at what we're aware of today, but really design for a future that's a little bit unknown, right? I mean, if you designed a holistic data infrastructure for everything that you had 5 years ago, AI just showed up and is going to blow all that up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's why I keep some of the stuff in my basement, because I know at some point I'm going to need it. I just don't know what for. Right? That's my argument. I'm going to stick to it. But in all seriousness, I think, there's so many uncovered uses, right, for data. And I think in particular, obviously in scientific area, Thomas, is that even higher, right? Because obviously that whole point is to uncover things. And then from the standpoint of data, you have a university. If students can't access data, they can't take class. It's not like the old days you go to class and you had a physical book and you could still lecture, right, and access information. So it kind of puts you dead in the water. Do you think the data value is different among scientific data?
Perhaps we can, or we have a different look on administrative data, where we have compliant rules, of course, and students have to find the lecture rooms and so on and so on. But this, well, in the worst case, can be solved manually. So just pick the next lecture room and meet there with your lecturer. In the research area, of course, you might repeat some experiments, and the effort it needs to rerun these experiments, you can put a price tag on. But there are experiments that simply cannot be repeated. Take, for instance, measures of a bridge 100 years ago. If you lose this data, it's lost forever and cannot be recovered, we cannot redo the experiment of a bridge that isn't there anymore. For instance, to compare lifespan of civil engineering to new data. So there is data that is simply non-recoverable, and if you lose it, it's gone, and we cannot put it into our research. So I'd say
it's invaluable.
A significant part of a university is its data.
Yeah.
Well, and some of the data is incredibly costly to regenerate, not just in dollars, but also time.
Yeah.
Right? I think about the COVID vaccine as an example, right? The COVID vaccine was the most tested vaccine in the world because we used computers and artificial intelligence to generate virtual twins to a scale you cannot replicate in the laboratory, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about the value of that data and how complex that data is and how cumulative the value of that is reached, if data like that is lost, you lose all of that cumulative value as well. And getting that back can be incredibly, incredibly expensive.
And if you, a bit of leave the area of economically interesting research, a while ago, some Islamistic terrorists blew up ancient statues somewhere in Afghanistan. So these aren't anymore. There are only their digital twins available. If this data is lost, they're gone forever. They cannot be replicated. I wouldn't rank many data as high as this, but as how it says, some experiments can be redone with various amounts of money, some simply can't.
Well, leads me into data protection landscape. So, we obviously used to be highly centralized, right? It's the data center we had to worry about protecting, and yes, the other copy, your secondary backup location. But now, especially in a university setting, I'm sure you saw massive amounts of this, Thomas, especially the last 5 years of remote workers, remote students, virtual. So not only do we have more branch offices that needed more IT support, data protection support, right up your alley, Howard, with financial services and, branch offices and banks. You can't have an IT person at each location, right? And, so how, I guess, with all these changes, and also I think the data itself, right? So now devices generate data, sensors, the students are generating data. There's new apps all the time. A lot of it's unstructured data, which is a way higher percentage than structured. So if you could comment, Thomas, on, I guess, the changes you've seen. You've been doing a lot of it all along because, students, taking courses, but have you seen any significant changes to strategy, or how does that impacted the landscape around data protection?
The office, the environment, or where the students and colleagues work, yes, has become more dispersed since home office, COVID, and so on. But that's not so much a challenge. It's much more difficult to cope with experiments where the data generating devices are getting even faster and faster, have higher resolutions, and so on. So, well, a while ago, some PC generated data, you got it on the PC of the researcher via network or via USB stick. Now we have systems that generate multitude of terabytes per day that has to be ingested to a structured storage at every time. So the requirement of immediate storage, immediate access to large amounts of data simultaneously to run analysis on these data has grown enormously. And as you say, IoT is one of these systems that generate huge amounts of data somewhere in a decentralized lab. At least we've developed processes for our centralized backup so that those colleagues that run decentralized systems that hold data can manage these systems on their own, even with a central backup. So if some chair owns a system with huge amount of data, they can add this system to the backup service. They can change the settings and so on. And this we have even expanded across universities. So when we run the infrastructure, a guy in a lab at another university can use this delegated self-service processes to manage the systems.
So you talked about the centralized, right, backup. Yeah. Are you using any of the data protection copies to feed into analytics or, a data lake or data lakehouse? And if so, is that structured and unstructured data, trying to pull that together? Because data protection is, yes, there's one point, obviously, to restore and have data available, but there's value in those copies, as we've been talking about, to do other stuff with it. So is that part of what you're looking to do, or in the future?
The structured data, at least at our university, is mostly the administrative data. So the huge amount of data is, well, what storage guys call unstructured. And of course, we do apply AI on these data as well, training and so on. But we do this mostly on the primary data, not on the backup copies.
Gotcha.
Tanya, what you bring up, though, is an excellent consideration for commercial backup and recovery, right? One of the issues that we're going to continue to have and continue to see is we have to manage bandwidth across the network, and backup is kind of non-negotiable, right?
Yeah.
I have to back up, I have to protect. And so if I can leverage my backup system, my protection system, as a analytics viable copy of data, right, and reduce more network movement, reduce another kind of the weight of grabbing that data from my primary system, it means not only do I avoid the network, but I also avoid any compute impact, any storage impact, any contention impact to those systems, giving me a really good kind of value improver of the cost of that backup, right? Because I really do need to be able to leverage things for analytics. And if I don't have to think about what is the additional load put on the primary system in order to run these analytics, all of a sudden things that may not have been viable previously become viable again.
You're absolutely right. On the other hand, many of the data are in a format only our research colleagues do understand. So the backup system does not necessarily know about the content of the data it backs up. So since we have perhaps a different economics, this leveraging of the data, at least currently, is not applied.
That makes sense, right? It's not going to be great for every use case, but it is another consideration that organizations should have.
Thank you.
So kind of shift gears on you, not to give you whiplash here, but I'd like to jump back to your project at RWTH, Thomas, and talk a little bit more about, we understand the scope of the challenges, the charter put forth, and what you are hoping to accomplish, bringing all these older systems forward and changing the whole landscape there, right? Can you talk a little bit more about the final solution you deployed? From my understanding, I think you back up like 7,000 different systems. And so you could talk about a little bit about what that looks like, and also any metrics or benefits that you can talk about, tangible, numerical points, and also any aspects of the Hitachi solution that contributed to the benefits.
So the solution mainly consists of the Hitachi storage layer. As a backup software, we choose the Commvault backup system, and in addition to that, we made much of our own work on the process layer to integrate those many universities in one system. So to have federated identity management with federated role and rights management, to have these delegated processes across universities that are legally independent. What we achieved? Well, right now, there, as we found in the beginning, ongoing attacks. So this or that department or researcher might get victim of an attack or data loss, and currently, no matter where they are, they just click on the system which lost its data, click on recover, and they get back their data within a few or a couple of hours, depending on how many. And this works within the university and across the university, and is quite reliable. And this reliability is the main issue or the main feature with the Hitachi infrastructure, which forms this last line of defense, so to say. Here we have 100% data persistency, which is the key factor. So whatever has been stored can be retrieved from there. And that's the key functionality we want to have with backup.
Now, did you look at kind of cloud backup as options? So I understand, obviously, you're providing this data protection for all these universities. What was your experience there?
Of course we did, but for either political reasons and economical reasons, the consolidated solution has many advantages over cloud. So if we would have been a small university running an infrastructure on our own, would be much more expensive from a total cost of ownership perspective compared to cloud. But on the scale we are now, the scalability effects are sufficiently good to compete with a cloud solution.
Yeah, you brought in TCO. In the past it was, how fast can you recover, right? Speed. But I do think TCO is a critical aspect of that. Howard, do you hear a lot of customers talk about the TCO in terms of data protection, or what do you think is the higher, I guess, benefit they're looking to get out of it? Obviously speed and yeah.
I do hear TCO kind of as the kind of discussion point, but it's TCO based on meeting the metrics that are required.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So if I have targets in mind, then those targets are foundational to the project even being considered. If it can't meet those, we move on to another technology. From there, it really is what is the total cost of ownership. It is not what is the ROI. And those two things are not interchangeable and shouldn't be interchangeable in our minds, right? An insurance policy does not have an ROI. It has a total cost of ownership. We need to really think about that and have that as a primary consideration, right? When you're in a room with someone who starts talking about the ROI of your backup and recovery system, they fundamentally either don't understand how business works or don't understand what the purpose of backup and recovery is, right? So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I just was thinking about life insurance policy. It just doesn't make sense, right? All right. So with that, you went through a lot, Thomas, to bring, this yesteryear solution forward. Not just infrastructure, but you talked a lot about policies and moving things forward. If you could kind of share with fellow peers, listening in, customers dealing with similar data protection challenges, where do they get started if they're looking at, modernizing data protection, things to avoid, maybe some lessons that you learned along the way that you wish somebody had told you, right, as you were going through this?
When we keep aside all the other things and just concentrate on the data protection, the project was much, much more than just changing one piece of infrastructure against another. But we had so many processes that had to be changed. And well, we had 22 decades of experience with another well-known product, and which led to the point that even our internal service level agreements were written in the terminology of that other product. So we do not have only to train the technical guys that run the system, but also the managers that take care for the service level agreements, that they have to think in different metrics from now on, that it is a very bad idea to try to map the old metrics on a new system with a completely different, call it philosophy, beneath. So you really have to dive in the new infrastructure, hardware-wise and software-wise, and adopt your processes so that you can benefit from the features of this new infrastructure. Trying to keep everything unchanged and just change the product beneath, I think won't work on that scale.
Yeah, so I think you're saying, separating the existing infrastructure and maybe the benefits or metrics you are getting from where you're trying to go as a company and what metrics you want to achieve versus just maybe turning the dial if you're too hooked to old metrics or specific infrastructure and system metrics. You can't really think out of the box and come up with new goals, right? Am I paraphrasing that okay?
Not perhaps not even new goals, but you have to to reformulate the goals according to the new infrastructure. If you try to map something that thinks in, say, backup versions to something different that thinks in backup days, you will not have fun if you keep to the old terminology.
I think there's an additional layer there, right? It's incumbent upon us to review our operating model to make sure that we're serving the business the best we can in the current environment. And a lot of times we did the best we could with the environment that we had 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago when we established these. It's a good time to look at your operating model and determine, does my operating model serve the business best today? And in doing that, you're going to find when it comes to backup and recovery, it probably doesn't. Unless you've done that in the last 3 years, it probably doesn't. I can no longer rely on things being in the same place when I implement the backup model as when I update the backup model, right? Things are going to move from data center to edge, federated, centralized to federated, data center to cloud, or cloud to data center, or from one cloud to another cloud. And so I really need to think about how do I protect things today, and how does my operating model, right, which is how my people and process and technology fit together, work kind of seamlessly to enable all of that. And so I think one problem that customers run into is they look at a piece of infrastructure and think they can replace that piece of infrastructure and not adjust their operating model. And then they go, why didn't we get, like, why is the TCO so much higher? Well, because you didn't look at your operating model. You thought this was just a rip and replace. And in fact, this affected how you operated, how you worked, and the benefits you should have got, you kind of ignored because you didn't change what you were doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, a lot of organizations wait until some major event happens or they're going to do a technology refresh. But is there, I think you brought up a great point. Like, should customers be looking at it regardless every, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, so they don't get, 5 years, a decade away and realize that what they're looking to do in their operating model is out of whack, right? How do they prevent from getting so far away, I guess? Is there some type of recommendation that you would say?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years. The reason I say 2 years, I tend to like to buy technology on 3-year contracts. 2 years means 1 year before the refresh comes up, I'm already looking at it, because ultimately there is very little that I can do a 0-day rip and replace. Right. So I need some time to research. I need some time to develop. I need some time to consider. I need some time to discuss, right? Very few of these decisions are made just by a single person. And then I'm likely to need some time to get into discussions, take a look at what's in the market, right? Make a decision, implement it, and then have enough kind of overlap there at the end to ensure a seamless transition. And I find 2 years tends to be the ideal time for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, if you wait till your contract is about to expire, you're kind of held over the barrel, right? And not being as thoughtful and strategic.
The world is changing much too fast, so you can't afford to wait until something happens or some external trigger. So I agree with these 2 years.
Yep, you don't want to end up in obsolescence. So speaking out about how things change so quickly, if you could look into magic ball and look at what the future of data protection looks like. I know there's talks that SNIA is working on storing data in DNA. We could send things to outer space and cool it and be able to store it more efficiently and all this crazy stuff. Realistically, for large organizations, Howard, what would you say we're going to have in the future for data protection? Are certain technologies going away? Are some of these crazy things going to come into play? What would you predict?
Ultimately, the way we store data and the location we store data, it kind of doesn't matter where that evolves to, because already I can't control where data is going to be created and where data is going to be stored. Instead, I need to protect it wherever that happens today. And so while tomorrow that may accelerate, while tomorrow that may change again, it's already changed enough that I should have been considering that. And thus, I'm kind of ready for it, right? Yes, the storage of data will continue to increase in the volumes that it can accept, the velocity it can accept, and the variety it can accept, that's simply the system's getting better, right? So as we move to DNA, as we move to location changes, we're already faced with those things. They're just going to improve and likely become a little more myriad, right? And so I need to consider that today in any system, right? How do I make sure I can protect my applications, protect my people, protect my data, regardless of where it sits? And that has to be fundamental to the systems that we implement today.
Thomas, anything to add to that as you look into your crystal ball?
Perhaps to all how it's said, since the dependency on data ever increases and the amount of data ever increases, backing up data or storing data has to become even faster than today, much faster. Since, well, to get back to these business terms, RTO and RPO, the expectations that whatever happens, I, as a researcher, do not lose data and do not even lose the experiment I conducted an hour ago, is steadily growing. So I have to pick up and secure the data much more frequently than the previous once per night.
Yeah, some interesting points I'm picking up on here, right? As we talk about the future, regardless of where the data ends up locating, I'm seeing an intersection between data protection and data management, because it's one thing of where it's located, but do you have the appropriate data management in place to categorize it, find it, clean it, make sure it's, maybe you want to move it from, Flash to DNA. I don't know. But if you're not managing your data, you don't know where it is. That seems like it's a pretty important aspect. Thomas, do you see that as a strong, interrelationship with data protection?
Yes and no. So you're absolutely right that data management is important. As many others, since recently we had a tape infrastructure, and since our previous product offered both functions in one tool, we called that backup and we called that archive. And that was a learning on the process level alongside our project, that we separate data protection and the archival function, at least for research data. So backup being data protection on a system level with one area or one process, and archive as one step in research data management becomes much more of a process term. So backup data is, we keep it 90 days currently, which is sufficient to, or at least we hope it is sufficient to recover from an attack or an emergency. On the research field, we have scientific workflows, scientific processes, and once an experiment has been completed or a project has been completed, the researcher tag these data that belong together, that belong to this project, and say, store it safely, archive it. It might end up on the same technical infrastructure, but process-wise, we completely separated these two aspects.
Different workflow.
Definitely.
Yeah. Is that common, do you think, Howard? Separate?
I think it's becoming more and more common, as well it should be, right? Because they are different frames of mind. The conversation around archive should not be had around the conversation of backup retention. They are very much not the same thing.
Right.
My application state changes too frequently to match with what I need from an archive, right? And then I also need to think about how much of the archive is application dependent, how much of the archive is data dependent. An archive should be a data dependent archive, not an application dependent. I don't want to restore an application from 4 years ago to the application state that it was in, but I do need access to the data from 4 years ago, right? So separating those conversations allows us to be really prescriptive about the things that we do, as well as add a level of pragmatism to ensure that we're not overdoing it in one area or the other, that we're not costing ourselves dollars in one area or the other that we shouldn't, which is another kind of key value to breaking those two things out. And again, that archive copy can then be used for other analytics uses as well.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that GigaOM recently rated Hitachi as a leader and fast mover in the 2024 Unstructured Data Management Report. I was just wondering, I think 4th consecutive year, I was just wondering if you could touch on any important data management aspects that relate to data protection that you saw Hitachi having here.
I would say scale, ease of use, scale, simplicity, scale. What did I miss? Scale? I don't think I talked about scale.
I'm like, got it. Scale. All right. Well, I think you both shared some really incredible insights on this call. And do you have any other comments you want to share as we wrap up here?
So I would say make the system as simple as possible, but no simpler, right? Involve the business in the conversations because they're ultimately the customer, and make sure that the organization understands the purpose of what you're doing and be pragmatic when you can.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining me today. Thank the audience for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this and got some insights and learnings from our experts here. And I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Bye-bye.